Hello and welcome to Asian Insider. I'm Ravi Velloor, and my guest today is the eminent economist, Dr. Khor Hoe Ee. And we're going to discuss the rapid advance of artificial intelligence and how it could affect the economies and lives in Southeast Asia. The US and China lead the world in artificial intelligence. And already we are seeing the disruptions that AI can cause in the daily reports that come from there about jobs being lost or displaced. There's even talk of robots that can start and run entire companies. To discuss the implications of this new world, I reached out to Dr. Khor, whom I've known for more than 30 years, and I first met him during another period of great tumult, which is the Asian financial crisis. At that time, he was a senior economist at the Monetary Authority of Singapore. Dr. Khor has previously worked at the International Monetary Fund during the Latin American debt crisis. And last year, he retired as the Chief Economist of AMRO, which is the ASEAN Plus 3 macroeconomic research organization. So there's a lot to unpack today, and I'm looking forward to this conversation, Dr. Khor.
Yeah, thank you, Ravi. Thank you for inviting me to this podcast.
Dr. Khor, the so-called Fourth Industrial Revolution was all about automation and robotics. And the Fifth Industrial Revolution seems to be all about artificial intelligence. It seems to me that we entered this Fifth Industrial Revolution just as we were settling into the Fourth Industrial Revolution, What an amazing pace of change. Have you seen anything like this before?
No, not really. Yeah. Actually, we are writing about the Fourth Industrial Revolution in our REO flagship report.
Which is the Regional Economic Outlook.
Yeah. The ASEAN Plus 3 Regional Economic Outlook. And we have a special chapters on technology. That was back in 2019 or 2020. I don't remember exactly which year. By that time, I think we were already talking about AI. So AI is not new, At that time, it was more about automation, autonomous driving, and how the Chinese are ahead of the US because they have more data, they have more manpower, to capture the images and all that. I think that the key shift came about in 2022 when they developed the large language model.
Right.
There was a qualitative shift in AI, and that was a eureka moment for the industry,
right.
I think.
Yes.
And we didn't foresee that, of course.
Yeah.
But when it came out,
this was the release of ChatGPT.
That moment, they call it. Yes.
Yeah.
It was very impressive because all of a sudden it shifted from being task-specific to cognitive ability, right? It's able to write papers for you. It's able to summarize, analyze, do all these impressive things that we thought only humans can do.
Right.
So at that time I was still, in AMRO. So I heard about it and I knew it's going to be something very important, but I didn't really have time to work on it. I only started using it more actively this year when I retired from AMRO and started to teach, right? And then I was able to use AI to help me develop the syllabus, to develop the lecture notes.
Where are you teaching?
I was teaching at RSIS.
Oh, RSIS, yes,
NTU.
of course.
Yeah. So I was teaching the second trimester on international economic institutions and policies. So without AI, I think I would have been lost. Truthfully.
Without AI, you would have been lost. My goodness. For you to say that, that's something else.
But it turns out AI also created a lot of work for me because I encouraged the student to use AI in doing the research and writing the paper, right? Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, when I'm, have a paper in front of me, I'm not sure whether it's AI or the student.
Amazing, right? I'm sure every lecturer has that problem,
So I had to schedule one-on-one meetings with all my students in order to test them on the understanding of what they write. Right? I really enjoy that a lot. It's a lot of work, but it goes to show how qualitative the change has been.
Right. There have been other periods in history of, general purpose technologies coming in and making great change, electricity, computing, the steam engine, and so the internet and so forth. But it looks like each time the periods come shorter and shorter, like, the economic cycles of the latter day. Now, what is different about this technology if you compare it with the others?
I think two things. One is the speed, right? I mean, AI can basically do what human beings are able to do 1,000 times faster, right? I mean, you assign a task, for instance, to do some research on green technology, and it comes out within a few minutes, you have a long 10-page note. Whereas in the past, I would have had to get a few research assistants to help me to collect the data, sieve through the data, see what is relevant and all that. All that has now been compressed, right? So I think it is the equivalent of automation on the manual labor side. This is mental labor, right? Cognitive labor, knowledge labor. We know that automation was already happening in China, for instance. That a lot of the manual labor has been taken over by robotics and all that, right? So when you combine the two together, it's incredible.
I see. I get that. Now, some months ago, when we were discussing the Trump tariffs, I remember a statement that you made to me when you said that the market is bigger than Donald Trump. But I recently heard you say that while the markets are bigger than Trump, markets are not bigger than technology. What did you mean by that?
Well, what I meant is that Trump's tariff war, right, was very outrageous. I think all of us were shocked by it, right? But if you look at what happened in the last 12 months, the global economy turns out well, right? We were expecting the global economy to tank. We were expecting higher inflation. None of that happened, right? So it looks like market had gamed Trump, right? And, I think the Robert Armstrong of Financial Times termed it taco, right? Trump always chickens out. So market is, Wall Street is able to, basically, buy the panic and sell the recovery, and and then importers basically front load the imports,
Right.
in order to smooth out. So what happened is that at the end of the year, the economy was booming, right, and we didn't see the inflation because the market was gaming the Trump. They increased the export or import, increased the imports when the tariff was lower, right, before the pause period expire, so that they will not be hit by the higher tariff. And then when the higher tariff hit, they actually didn't pass it on to the consumer because they expected the tariff to be declared illegal by the Supreme Court, right? So as a result, we didn't see the inflation that we were expecting. And this actually provides room for the Federal Reserve to lower rates. But that was because the Trump policy was basically, I think market read him well, knowing that he's going to chicken out after declaring the technology is very different, right? Technology affects the production process. It affects the production, increased productivity, right? And it was silently driving the economy while we were focused on Trump, okay? And so I think there's this study by Jason Furman of Harvard University where he says that basically AI and data center is like 4% of the economy, but contribute 92% of the growth. So in the first half of the year in the US, without AI, growth would have been 0.1%. But because of the huge investment in data center and AI, growth was 2%, right? So it basically offset whatever negative impact there was from the tariff side. Okay, so it helps to pull the economy along, right, and support the economy. And this year, last year they invested 400 billion. This year they're expecting to invest 600 billion.
Right.
So that's the scale of AI and data center that you don't find in the tariff side.
Right. No, I saw a reporting in Nikkei where a figure was cited that Asian economies are going to spend 136 billion this year in AI chip making investments. Now, can I ask you, if the US and China are so far ahead in this whole AI thing, and I did see some statistics that showed that US spending on data centers exceeded consumption spending as a growth driver, as you just pointed out. Now, how do we in Southeast Asia get affected if all the large language models are originating somewhere else. Is it something that we need to think about, to worry about?
I think, I saw Jensen Huang's interview on once, and he basically said there are 5 layers of infrastructure, and he classified AI as one of the layer of infrastructure. Okay? So AI is basically an infrastructure, it's a tool, right? And it's true that US and China are way ahead, but I think it would be silly for ASEAN to compete with these two giants in terms of developing frontier AI, generative AI, right? But because there are two, as long as they're accessible to other countries, we can leverage on that to develop applications, right? And we have seen that, for instance, in Grab. Grab has become, beat Uber in terms of developing the share ride service here in the region, right? Why? Because they have local knowledge. They apply the mapping technology, the internet technology to customize it to the local needs, right? So that's how we should look at AI. AI is a tool that we can leverage on to increase our productivity, to develop new applications, rather than competing on the frontier.
So are we truly into an era where applications beat infrastructure? Is that what you're suggesting?
Application as against infrastructure means AI, right? So AI is going to become a part of the infrastructure. It's just like electricity, internet, and all that. And so over time, everybody is going to be using AI to do something, right? Either to increase the productivity or develop new services, new products.
Right. I like the fact that you cited Grab as an example, but realistically, how big is that market? And can we afford to not be in infrastructure and manufacturing?
Grab is, I think the valuation is about 40 billion.
Right.
Okay? So it's not small. It's not 1 trillion, like TSMC.
Yeah.
But we can have more of this type of company in the region, which are targeted at a local market, developing application. I think that's what we need in order to enhance our productivity. And we can, so to me, that's where the opportunities are for AI, for the region, making use of that. And we see other examples as well. C Limited, for instance, they're in gaming, e-commerce, right? And again, they're very successful. They've developed, local markets and all that, regional market.
Right.
On manufacturing, I don't think we should get out of manufacturing. We are actually a manufacturing hub, right? We are part of the global value chain for manufacturing, for chips, for iPhone, for appliances and all that. And now we are going to embed AI within manufacturing. Right?
Yeah.
So now we are what you call the dark factories. Right?
I was going to ask you about the dark factories. Yes.
The dark factories basically is leveraging on the before AI, pre-AI technology, right? They're able to invent robotics. They're able to take over most of the manual tasks. But because manufacturing, you're producing a product, a standardized commodity, right? Which is standardized across.
Right.
Then you're able to basically automate everything and have the robotics do it.
Right.
With AI, it's a little bit different because I think you still need oversight. You still need judgment. You still need to, So I had the same experience with AI because the first time I used it to ask it to help me to draft something, it came out within seconds, right? And I was so impressed. But then when I started looking closely at the script, I realized that some things are not quite right?
Okay.
So you still need that human oversight.
I see.
Because
Okay.
it's not a commoditized product. Right?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. But, as you pointed out about dark factories, that's in manufacturing, is there an equivalent in services?
I think it's already happening, I mean, radiology, right?
With what?
Radiology, for instance.
Yes.
A lot of these financial statements, right? You can put it into an AI machine and it comes up with an analysis, a summary, a report. And that's where, the humans take over. You then have to scrutinize, make sure that it's not hallucinating. Right? But for standardized product, as I said, it can be easily automated by AI, right?
Yeah.
Where we intervene is where we need some judgment.
Right.
Yeah.
But radiology is a high-paying job.
So machines are taking over.
So
At least the intermediate.
you could say the same about a country like Singapore, where the legal fraternity is actually a fairly well-off fraternity. Does that mean that people in the legal fraternity, people in radiology, should be a little concerned about this? And how can they survive this?
If you're already there,
Yeah.
you have the domain knowledge,
Yeah.
you have the judgment, you have the experience, you will survive. You survive provided you leverage on AI. If you don't, you're going to be 10 times behind your competitor elsewhere, right? So I think the main thing is to be able to keep up with AI, leverage on it, use it. And that's what I think that the government has decided, right? They have now decided to basically train 100,000 AI literate workers.
Singaporeans,
Right?
yes. That's in Singapore.
In Singapore,
But can we go a little granular, since you are, a regional specialist in the ASEAN +3 environment? Let's start with Indonesia. Why do you think Indonesia should watch out for in AI?
I think Indonesia, as I said, AI should be embraced and embedded in every levels of work, right? Now, Indonesia is basically a commodity-based economy,
right?
Very agricultural. But even in agriculture, I think there's scope to apply AI to see how you can increase the yield of palm oil, rubber, but at the company level, the government level, right? The government can apply AI to improve the efficiency of the bureaucracy, to translate, from English to Bahasa if needed, So in the services sector, they are short of lawyers, they are short of accountants. I think AI can substitute for some of that.
Right.
And leverage on that.
Right. But what about a services-based economy like the Philippines?
Yes, Philippines is going to be disrupted, right? Because it is a big BPO center. But as I said, if they leverage on it now, they can stay ahead, right?
I see.
But what it does mean is that there'll be fewer and fewer, recruit into the BPO, because the existing one will move up the ladder, and be very competitive, and they may even retrench some of the middle level, workers.
Yeah. What are the services that could be relatively untouched by AI? Shall we call it AI proof?
Well, those would be where you need the human touch, emotion. Sports, for instance.
Sports.
You can have AI kung fu, right? But it's no fun. You want to see human beings. So I think there are certain type of services where I think you still need human beings. Elderly care, child care,
nursing,
nursery, where the product is not really commodity, right? It's very customized to individual child, right? So I think they can still leverage on AI to, do some of the work. But I think essentially you need human beings intervention, to provide those kind of services.
Right. Realistically speaking, how many years do we have to get completely ready for this? Or, do we have some margin of time, or are we already under threat?
Well, you mentioned, electricity to 40 years.
Yes.
And
steam
computer
engine
to 30 years.
Yeah.
Internet 20 years.
Right.
So AI maybe you have 10 years.
10 years. That's is that quite generous, or do you think
it's actually really quite generous already? Because when I see the improvement over the last 6 months, it's really quite astounding. So I think we have maybe 5 to 10 years, right, before it gets embedded into the work. But already I think it's affecting all it. My nephew works in an accounting firm, auditing firm rather, and he tells me he has all his database, processed by AI. So whenever he needs something, he just ask AI to pull the data for it, analyze and summarize for him.
Right. I was at this Cisco AI Summit in San Francisco last month, and Sam Altman of OpenAI, he spoke of the possibility of robots setting up and running entire companies. Now, what do we humans do in that scenario? We cannot all stand by the ocean and staring out and eating grapes. What do you think is left for the human to do in this age of automation, robotization, and AI?
Yeah, I think at the moment he's ahead of himself, if you may allow me to say that. Because I think the next stage of AI is agentic AI, as you may know. AI that can actually run the process within a company, the workflow, So, and that will be a big leap because it means that the middle level will be hollowed out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they can do all the work that middle management is normally doing, but I can't imagine an AI setting up a company because AI it's not ambitious, you know. They don't have profit motive. Human beings are the one, right?
Right.
Like Elon Musk, right? He's really to work, so hard in order to get his
Of course.
Tesla company
Yeah,
up.
or maybe he was
running.
overstating the case a bit, but the general question is about if all these machines are starting to do so much of what humans did before, there's going to be a lot of spare people and spare time with people. What do they do then? And how do they earn an income? Is there a case ultimately for universal basic income in a situation where automation, robotization, and AI proliferates?
No, actually, that's my concern too. The disruption in the employment market, because essentially the traditional work that used to be done by, say, 1,000 people can now be done by 100, right? So what do less than 900 people do?
Right.
Especially the ones who are new to the industry. As I said, if you have domain knowledge and you leverage on it, you can probably keep your job. Okay, but if you don't, you're the just graduated and you're applying for the job, you're probably much harder. I think in some sense we have gone through this disruption by technology. Even in manufacturing, now we have the dark factory, no workers. Everything is done by machines. And the services sector have been the one that's been absorbing all these surplus labor that's been retrenched, right? So I guess the question is whether we think services sector can continue to play that role in terms of creating new demands, new supply. Maybe there be more, sports type of thing, cultural activities, more gaming and all that. Because you need a demand and you need a supply, right? And you have all these people who are displaced. But the other issue is that traditional economy is based on marginal productivity equals to wage, right? And I think that it's going to be a big transition, right? Because how do you assess the productivity? Somebody who's now doing the work of 10 times what his predecessor used to do. So a lot of this productivity, I think, will not be reflecting in higher profit, but it will be reflecting in lower price because it's like internet. It's a zero marginal cost product. It's an infrastructure, right? But the application will require new people to work on it, to support it, to sustain it, and that's where they're going to create jobs. But it is a big challenge.
It is a big challenge. Can I ask you a broad question? Who do you think is going to win this AI race? Is it going to be the US or China, or could there be somebody else who shows up? And in these times of geopolitical cleavage, how do we in Singapore and how do we in ASEAN position ourselves?
Well, I think it depends on which part of the AI you're talking about. On frontier AI, it looks like at the moment the US is ahead because it has the fastest chip, right? It has the TSMC 2 nanometer chip. Whereas China doesn't have that. But China is developing
7 nanometer.
by ways to go get around. More clever algorithm, more clever. And DeepSeek was a big breakthrough for them.
Right.
But since then, Huawei has managed to come up with their own high-speed computing power. So I think the two will continue to compete with each other. There will be many winners within the AI space, like Anthropic, right, specialized in certain things. OpenAI on other areas,
right.
And then you have Perplexity. You have So each of these different Gen AI will specialize in particular areas. So if somebody will specialize on law or the legal side, sports or something. So within the sector, there will be competitors, and then between countries, I think China is the obvious one that's very active in application, right? They are much more active in applying it to manufacturing, developing humanoids and all those areas. So I think in our case, we should also get into the application side and try to develop certain applications, certain services,
right.
Which are competitive with the ones that are out there. Yeah.
I have a final question. There is talk that artificial intelligence could bring deflation because it will depress wages. It could displace employment. which will all weigh on demand ultimately. Is it time for the world to relook the whole model of capitalism that we've known for more than a century?
I think, yeah. It is. I don't know if you saw the Citrini report, right?
What report?
Citrini.
Citrini report, yes, of course. The Substack
sell-off in the,
yes.
in the market.
Right.
Because you're talking about a worst-case scenario where labor is laid off, there's no demand, and then it goes into a downward spiral, right? I think that's one risk, right? But, having gone through the pandemic where, the whole economy just shut down, and the government has to pump liquidity into the system to keep the people afloat. But of course, that was a temporary shock, right? Here you have a structural shock. And so the challenge is, but it doesn't happen like the pandemic overnight. It work itself out over the next 5-10 years, right? So there's time for, I think, governments, right, to take measures to try to reskill the labor, like what Singapore is trying to do now. But I think there is some uncertainty about the eventual, outcome of this whole process. But as I said, I think the services sector is one area where I think there's potential to reabsorb some of this excess labor, and the whole redistribution of income is going to be very different. But I do believe that it'll be useful for the government to have a policy of minimum basic income to support the labor, because I think there's going to be a lot of disruption in the economy.
I see.
But not every country can afford to do that, right? Fortunately, in Singapore, I think we can afford to do that. And while reskilling, they can then learn new skills, just like what the government is hoping to do.
Dr. Khor, that was a very insightful conversation. And thank you so much for coming on Asian Insider.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Really enjoyed this.
And that's a wrap for Asian Insider. I'm Ravi Velloor. Don't forget to share this podcast with your friends and family. And if you'd like to read my articles, we have links in our podcast show notes below. You can also sign up for our Asian Insider newsletter. Thank you for joining us.